Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's tutorial I have got a game-changing hack for you. If you've ever struggled with the provisional cast on, I have a way that's so much easier. No waste yarn, no mess and no stress. You will need your working yarn, a spare cable, then your knitting needle, some stoppers, a pair of knitting needles, and if you don't have interchangeable needles you can also use two circular needles. The first thing we have to do before we are casting on, we have to attach our stoppers to our spare cable. This way you can cast on a high number of stitches and you don't have to worry about losing any of them. If you are working with two circular needles, you might want to consider using two stitch stoppers to avoid losing any stitches. As you can see here, I did cast on over 200 stitches and I don't have any problems with it because I'm using the stoppers at the end of my spare cable. So grab your working yarn and your knitting needle and start with a slip knot and place it onto your knitting needle. When you are working your slip knot, make sure you leave enough yarn so that you can easily weave in your little yarn tails at the end later. So I'm holding this little yarn tail in my hands and now I'm placing the spare cable underneath my knitting needle and I'm holding it with my right hand and with my left hand. So it looks like this. So with your needle, you're going underneath your cable, grab the yarn and bring it back to the front, and now you have created your first stitch or loop onto your needle. Then work a yarn over. You can either work it from front to back or from back to front. It doesn't really matter because it doesn't change the look from this cast on. Secure your yarn over with your finger and then you bring your knitting needle underneath your cable, grab the yarn and then bring it back to the front to create another stitch on your needle. Then work another yarn over. And again, bring your needle underneath your cable, grab the yarn and bring it back to the front. Yarn over. With your knitting needle underneath your cable, grab the yarn and bring it back to the front. Yarn over. And then again, go underneath your cable, grab the yarn and bring it back to the front. So if this is your last stitch, you don't have to anchor your yarn, so you can just turn around your work and start knitting or purling. But if your last stitch is a yarn over, you have to anchor this stitch. Bring your working yarn underneath your cable needle and then you are going to bring it to the back in between the cable needle and the knitting needle like this. Then you can turn your work around and you can see here that I anchored this yarn over. So this is a little sample so that I can show you how you work it, but you cast on the number of stitches you need for your project and then start knitting or purling this row normally. It can feel a little bit awkward because of the cable. Mine is a little bit stiffer, but just knit or purl it like you would usually do. So if you are at the end of this row, you can either knit the slip stitch or unravel it. This is totally up to personal preference. If you want the slip stitch in there, you can knit it, but you can also undo it. If you unravel the slip stitch does not count as a stitch. So I will work a few rows and meet you back later. So I have worked a couple of rows here and now let me show you how you can easily knit the other end. So the first thing we have to do is to remove the stoppers and attach our knitting needles. If you are working with two circular needles, you already have your needles on there and you only need to remove your stitch stoppers. So if you want to fold it in half, you have to arrange your stitches on your needles and then fold it in half. And then you can easily knit the first stitches together. I will show you later on in my big knitting project how you can knit the stitches together when you want to create a folded edge. So let's knit over the first row of our provisional cast on. You probably won't have all these needles because you probably have already casted off all your knitting stitches and you want to knit the other side of your knitting project. Knit the first stitch, and when you look closely at the second stitch you can see that this stitch is twisted. A twisted stitch means that the right leg is at the back of the knitting needle. So that we won't end up with a twisted stitch here, we have to knit this stitch through the back loop. So when we look at the next stitch, the leading leg sits at the front of our needle. In Western knitting, the leading leg should always be at the front of our knitting needle. This way, we should know that our stitch mount is the correct way. Here you can see that the leading leg is at the back. This is the right leg of our knitting stitch and it sits at the back. And to make sure we don't twist it, we have to knit it through the back loop. The next stitch, the leading leg, sits at the front of our needle and we knit it normally. Then the next stitch, we knit it through the back loop and the next stitch is a normal stitch. So with this cast on, you can think of every other stitch will be a twisted stitch. Twisted stitches are a very large topic and I want to dive deeper into the anatomy of knitting stitches in a separate YouTube tutorial. So I have knitted a few rows and you can see if I hadn't used another color you wouldn't have seen any difference between the provisional cast on and the normal knitting rows. So now I also want to show you how you can make a folded edge with this provisional cast on. I will remove my stitch stopper and attach my yarn needle and then we are going to meet back here. So the stitch at the back is a twisted stitch and I have to knit this twisted stitch through the back. So I'm inserting my needle through the front stitch normally and the back stitch through the back loop. and then I'm knitting both stitches together and slip them off the needle. So the next stitches will be normally knitted through the front loop. I knit them together and then I'm slipping them off the needle. The next stitch at the back needle is a twisted stitch again, and I'm knitting it through the back loop. So you can make it easier. Slip your stitch at the back needle off purlwise and then slip it on purlwise at the front needle, and then you knit both stitches together. This might be a little bit easier for a beginner. So your twisted stitch, you have to slip them off through the back loop and then slip them on purlwise at the front needle and then knit them together normally. So slip the stitch at the back needle off purlwise and bring it to the front needle and then knit both stitches together. Slip the stitch through the back loop of purlwise and on, and then knit them both together. So if you want to see more about the provisional cast on, I already made a video about it and I will link it in the description down below. So that's already it for today's tutorial. Thank you so much for stopping by and spending your precious time with me. I really appreciate it that you are supporting my little channel here. I hope you have a lot of fun in trying out this really fun knitting trick. I wish you all the best. Stay healthy. Until next time. Bye.